He said it so calmly that, for a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Mom, maybe it's best if you don't come to the wedding. The room went quiet after that, but the silence said everything his words didn't. I sat there, clutching the edge of the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once cut his birthday cakes, helped him with homework, and watched him dream aloud about a life bigger than this small town. Now he was grown, about to marry the love of his life, and I, the woman who raised him, wasn't welcome. Tell me, how do you breathe when your own child decides you're too embarrassing to be seen, too ordinary, too mother? That's how this story begins, not with anger, but with disbelief, because I never thought I'd become invisible to the boy I once carried in my arms. The boy whose great knees I kissed, whose tears I wiped away, whose future I built from my own sacrifices. But life has a strange way of turning love into lessons, and this one I wasn't ready for. As I sat there that evening, the letter of invitation still unopened on the table, I began to realize something deeper. Sometimes our children don't just grow up, they grow away. And it's not always their fault. The world tells them that love must look perfect, that families should be polished, that mothers should fade quietly into the background once their job is done. But I wasn't ready to fade. Not yet. What if I told you that a mother's dignity doesn't end where her son's pride begins? That sometimes, when love pushes you out, self-respect shows you the way back in? Because that's what the story is really about. Not revenge, not drama, but a quiet reclaiming of worth. A reminder that being a mother isn't about staying silent when your heart is breaking. It's about standing tall when the world forgets who you are. By the time the story ends, you'll understand why I showed up at that wedding. Not to ruin it, but to remind my son of something he had forgotten. Who raised him? Who stood by him? And who still loved him enough to walk into a room full of strangers and hold her head high? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about one mother and one wedding. It's about every parent who has ever been pushed aside, every heart that's been quietly broken, and every soul that's had to rebuild itself from disappointment. You'll see what happens when silence turns into strength, and how one woman found her voice again on the very day she was told she didn't belong. And when I tell you how I walked through those church doors, dressed not as a guest, but as the woman who raised the groom, you'll understand that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't fight to be included, it's to show up anyway. I still remember the day my son was born, how tiny his fingers were, how his cry sounded like a promise, the kind of sound that makes you believe you'll do anything, everything to protect it. I was only 24 then, scared, hopeful, and certain that motherhood was the beginning of something sacred. We didn't have much: a small apartment, a secondhand crib, and dreams too big for the four walls we lived in. But I didn't care. Every morning I'd wake before dawn to pack his father's lunch, then rock him in my arms as the city outside began to hum. There was peace in those early years, even in the struggle, a peace that comes from knowing your child is your reason. That sentence, those 5 small words, lived inside me for years. They were my armor against loneliness, exhaustion, even heartbreak. Because truthfully, marriage wasn't kind to me. His father was a man of few words and even fewer affections. He worked, came home, and disappeared into silence. I tried, oh, how I tried, to make us feel like a family. I baked his favorite meals, kept the house spotless, ironed his shirts with care. But love can't bloom where it's never watered. So I poured it all into my son. Every ounce of tenderness I never received went into raising him. When his father left, suddenly, quietly, with a note that said only, "I need to start over," I didn't cry in front of my boy. I smiled, told him, "It's just us now, sweetheart." And it was. We became a team, mother and son, facing the world together. I worked 2 jobs, slept little, and prayed a lot. I'd watch him sleep at night, his lashes resting on his cheeks, and I'd whisper promises he couldn't hear. "You'll never go without my boy. You'll never feel unwanted." Years passed. He grew into a man, tall, kind, and ambitious. He got his first job, bought me my first smartphone, and said, "You need to keep up with the times, Mom." We laughed. I still called him my baby when no one was around, and he'd roll his eyes and say, "I'm too old for that." But he'd still hug me afterward. I thought I had done something right. Then one day, he met her. At first, I was happy. Every mother dreams her child will find someone who loves them as deeply as she once did. She was pretty, polite too, but there was something in her smile I couldn't quite read. The way she'd glance at me as though I were a ghost she had to tolerate. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe she just needed time. But over time, little things changed. He called less. He visited less. When he did come by, he seemed distracted, like he was living a life somewhere else that no longer had room for me. Once I made his favorite dish, biryani, the way he loved it as a boy. He barely touched it. She said she didn't eat rice after 7 p.m. He smiled, followed her lead, and left the table half full. I sat there, pretending to be busy with dishes, my hands trembling under the warm water. The silence between us began to grow, slowly at first, like dust in an empty room, then faster, heavier, until it felt like we were speaking different languages entirely. When he told me he was getting married, I smiled so wide it hurt. My heart beat fast, part joy, part fear. "Oh, my darling, that's wonderful," I said, reaching to hug him, but he hesitated. Just a second, enough for me to notice, enough for something inside me to break. He told me about the venue, the date, and the colors. I listened, nodding, asking questions like a mother should. But every time I said, "I can help with," she'd interrupt. "It's all under control." A few days later, I overheard them arguing on the phone. His voice was low, tense. "She's my mother." Then a pause, a sigh. "Fine, I'll talk to her." When he came over that evening, he couldn't look me in the eye. "Mom," he said softly, "about the wedding." I smiled, though my stomach twisted. "Yes, sweetheart." He hesitated. "We were thinking maybe it'd be better if you didn't come." At first, I thought he was joking. I laughed, a little too loud. "Oh, don't be silly," I said. But he didn't smile. He just looked down, ashamed. "She thinks it might be awkward, you know, because of the guest list and space and—" I stopped him. She doesn't want me there." He said nothing, and silence, I've learned, speaks louder than anything else. I nodded slowly, my throat dry. "I see," I whispered. "Well, I wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable." He looked relieved, and that, more than anything, broke me. That night, after he left, I sat in the dark living room staring at his baby photos, his first tooth, his graduation picture, the drawing he made in kindergarten that said, "I love my mom." And somewhere between those frames and the ticking clock, something shifted inside me. I realized I had spent my whole life showing up for him, and now he was asking me to disappear. I went to bed that night with my heart heavy, but my mind clear. I didn't know what I'd do yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't done being his mother. The next morning, as sunlight spilled through the curtains, I whispered to myself, if he doesn't want me at his wedding as his mother, then I'll go as the woman who raised him. And that was the beginning, the quiet moment before the storm. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake listening to the clock tick, every second louder than the last, every moment a reminder that my son had outgrown me. Or maybe he had chosen to forget me. I turned toward the wall where his childhood photos still hung, the one where he was missing a front tooth, smiling proudly after his first school play, another of him on his 10th birthday, frosting on his nose, laughing so hard his eyes disappeared. Those pictures used to bring me joy. Now they felt like ghosts watching me from a happier lifetime. I whispered to them softly, "When did you stop being my boy?" The house was quiet, but the memories were loud. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for his school plays when I could barely keep my eyes open after work. I remembered pretending not to hear his father's cruel words so my son wouldn't grow up afraid of love. I remembered the way he'd run to me after every heartbreak, every lost game, every disappointment. "You always make it better, Mom," he'd say. And now he didn't even want me there for the most important day of his life. I thought of all the times I'd said no to myself so I could say yes to him. The dresses I never bought, the trips I never took, the dreams I'd tucked away neatly like old linens in the attic. I had built my life around his. And maybe that was my mistake. Because when your whole world revolves around one person, you stop being the sun. You become a shadow. Still, I couldn't hate him. I tried to. I wanted to. But love doesn't vanish just because it's unreturned. It lingers, like perfume on an empty chair. The next morning, I made tea and sat by the window. The sunlight hit my hands, tracing the wrinkles that told my story. Every crease, every scar, every sacrifice. For the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt full of things left unsaid, of love that refused to die quietly. I started writing, just small notes at first, things I wish I could tell him. "You were my whole world. I never stopped praying for you. You can replace a mother's presence, but never her love." I filled 3 pages before I stopped. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time. Fire. Somewhere between the ink and the ache, I realized this wasn't just about being uninvited. It was about being unseen. I had spent years fading into the background, quietly holding everyone else's happiness together while mine crumbled silently. Maybe it was time to step back into the light. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. I busied myself with chores, polishing furniture that didn't need polishing, watering plants that were already green, cooking for no one. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape that empty seat at the wedding table where I should have been. Then one evening, as I was folding laundry, I came across his old shirt, a faded blue one with a tiny rip near the collar. It still smelled faintly of his childhood, of sunshine and soap. I pressed it to my chest and cried. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that comes from deep within, from years of holding everything in. That's when something inside me shifted again.
I realized that grief and strength often share the same heartbeat, and that maybe, just maybe, this pain was trying to teach me something.
So I stopped asking why he didn't want me there and started asking why I had let myself disappear so easily. I began doing small things for myself. I wore my hair down again the way I used to when I was young. I found an old sewing machine and started making dresses, not for him, but for me. I'd sit by the window late at night, the soft whirring of the needle keeping me company. Each stitch felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One morning, I took out an old photo album and turned to a picture of my mother. Stern, graceful, proud. She had raised 5 children on her own after my father passed. I remembered how strong she looked, even in her grief. And I heard her voice again, faint but firm. Never let love make you small. It hit me then. I had become everything she warned me not to be. And in that realization, I found my strength returning, drop by drop. Then came the wedding week. The city buzzed with excitement. My neighbors whispered, "Congratulations," to me, not knowing I hadn't been invited. I smiled politely and said, "Yes, it's this weekend," before quietly retreating inside. That Friday evening, I saw a car pull up outside. His. My son stepped out, dressed neatly, his hair styled, just like when he was a teenager and I used to comb it before school. For a moment, my heart leapt. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he'd come to say, "Mom, I can't do this without you." He knocked on the door gently. I opened it, forcing a smile. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "Hi, Mom," he replied, looking uncomfortable. "I just wanted to drop this off." He handed me a small box, wedding sweets. I took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," I whispered. He glanced at his watch. "I should go. Big day tomorrow." "Of course," I said, my voice barely a breath. Then I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized something heartbreaking. He wasn't cruel. He was just young, caught between love and guilt, too weak to choose what was right over what was easy. As he turned to leave, I wanted to call out to him, to tell him I forgave him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, watching him disappear down the path, my little boy walking into a future that didn't have space for me. When the car drove away, I set the sweets on the table and opened the box. Inside was a card, gold letters on white paper. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of..." I stopped reading. The invitation wasn't for me. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Ahmed, his father, and his father's new wife. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hand shook. He hadn't just replaced me in his wedding, he'd replaced me in his heart. I sat there for a long time, the world outside blurring through tears I couldn't stop. But when I finally wiped them away, my reflection in the window didn't look broken anymore. It looked determined. Because if my son wanted to forget where he came from, I'd remind him. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through presence. Through the quiet, unshakable power of a mother's love that refuses to vanish. So I made myself a promise that night. I would go to that wedding, not as a guest, not as his mother,
but as the woman who raised him, the woman whose love built the man he had become. And when he saw me, he would remember. That night, the house felt colder than usual, not because of the weather, but because of what I decided. I sat in the living room, the wedding card still open on the table, the golden letters gleaming under the dim light. For years, I had lived for that boy, sacrificed everything, smiled through pain, and waited for the smallest bits of gratitude. But now, I realize something both painful and liberating.
He may have forgotten who I was, but I hadn't. I was the woman who raised him, the one who stayed up during his fevers, who scraped coins together to buy his first shoes, who whispered prayers over his sleeping head every night. And if he wanted to erase me from his story, I'd remind him that I was the author of the first chapter of his life. For days I walked through the house like a ghost, touching old furniture, sorting through memories like photographs of a life half forgotten. Every object had a story, every corner whispered a name, and all of them ended with his. In the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed, I found the dress I'd worn to his first graduation. It was soft blue with tiny pearl buttons that caught the light when I moved. I remembered how proud I'd been that day, sitting in the crowd with tears streaming down my face as he accepted his diploma. I had worn that dress like armor, proud, radiant, unstoppable. Now, as I held it against me, the fabric felt different, lighter, as if it was waiting to breathe again. But I didn't just want to show up. I wanted to remind him, gently, silently, who I truly was. So I decided to transform that dress. I spent nights sewing, adjusting, adding lace, fixing the hem. Every stitch carried a memory, a lullaby, a scar. As the needle danced, I whispered softly, "You may not want me at your wedding, my son, but I will stand where I belong, with dignity, not bitterness." In the quiet rhythm of sewing, I found healing. I wasn't preparing to crash a wedding. I was preparing to reclaim my place, not as an uninvited guest, but as a mother who had earned the right to witness the happiness she helped create. Still, part of me trembled. What would people say? Would they stare? Whisper? Pity me? The thought stung, but another voice inside me, softer, wiser, said, "You've lived through worse. Let them whisper. They weren't there when you held that boy through nights of fever and fear." And that was the moment I stopped caring about appearances. I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. I wanted to look at him standing at the altar and know that even if he'd turned his back on me, I had done my part. I had raised him with love, and that love had built the man standing there. So I began to prepare. On the morning of the wedding, I woke before sunrise. I made tea, strong, black, just how I liked it, and watched the first light break through the curtains. The sky blushed pink and gold, and I smiled quietly. "New beginnings," I whispered. I put on the blue dress. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for this day. I pinned my hair up the way I used to when I was younger, and for a moment, I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize her. The woman staring back wasn't the quiet, forgotten mother anymore. She looked like someone who had lived, who had loved fiercely and survived beautifully. I dabbed on a touch of lipstick, added my pearl earrings, and wrapped a soft shawl around my shoulders. It wasn't vanity. It was respect. For myself,
for the years that had shaped me. Then I took a deep breath and looked around the house one last time. The quiet walls, the photographs, the soft hum of memories, they all felt like witnesses to what I was about to do. Before leaving, I picked up a small envelope from the table. Inside was a letter, the one I'd written for him, full of everything I couldn't say out loud. I placed it carefully into my purse. "I'll give it to him," I murmured, "if the moment feels right." Outside, the day was bright and warm. The world seemed too cheerful for the storm inside me. As I stepped into the cab, the driver looked at me through the rearview mirror and smiled. "Big day, ma'am?" I returned the smile softly. "Yes," I said, "very big." The drive to the wedding venue felt endless. Every turn brought back another memory. School recitals, birthday candles, laughter echoing down hallways. My hand shook slightly as I clutched my purse, but my heart, it was steady. When the car finally stopped, I saw it. The grand hotel decorated with flowers, ribbons, and music floating through the air. Guests in shining clothes, laughter everywhere. I stepped out slowly, unnoticed. The world had moved on without me, but I wasn't there to belong. I was there to be seen. I walked through the garden toward the main hall, keeping to the side paths. Every step was heavy with memories, his first steps, his first heartbreak, his first goodbye. And then, from a distance, I saw him, my son, standing at the altar, radiant, nervous, happy, his bride beside him, beautiful, young, unaware of the silent storm walking closer. For a moment, my knees went weak. I almost turned around. Almost. But then I remembered the nights I'd prayed for this very moment, for his happiness, his peace. And even if he hadn't wanted me there, I had come anyway, because that's what mothers do. We show up, even when we're told not to. So I stood quietly at the back, hidden behind a row of guests, my eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of quiet pride. He was everything I'd hoped he'd be, and everything I had helped him become. Then, as the vows began, I felt my heart race. This was it, the moment I'd both dreaded and longed for. And that's when something unexpected happened. A woman near the aisle turned and recognized me. Her eyes widened. She whispered to someone beside her. A ripple of whispers followed. Heads turned. And then he saw me. For a second, his expression froze. Confusion, then disbelief, then something else, something deeper. The music faded into a blur. The world slowed down. He took a step forward, his lips parting as if to say my name. And I stood there, rooted to the floor, heart pounding, eyes locked on his. I didn't need to speak. My presence said everything. All the love, all the pain, all the years. Everything he had forgotten was standing right in front of him. The whispers spread like wildfire. Eyes darted toward me, some confused, some curious, some pitying. But I didn't move. I just stood there, a quiet presence in the back of the hall, watching the ceremony that was never meant for me. He looked so handsome, my son, in his crisp black suit. His smile, the one I had loved since he was a boy, trembled slightly as his eyes locked with mine. The bride looked at him, puzzled. She followed his gaze, and when she saw me, her brows furrowed. I could almost hear the question in her heart, "Who is that woman?" A few guests shifted awkwardly. The officiant cleared his throat, hesitating mid-sentence. Time seemed to blur. And then
Quietly, my son took a step away from the altar. His voice broke through the air like a soft echo. Mom? That word, small, trembling, uncertain, shattered me.
When he finished reading, his shoulders trembled. He lifted his gaze to me, and in that look, everything changed. The anger, the shame, the distance, gone. All that remained was a son who finally saw his mother not as a shadow of his past, but as the root of his being. He reached out, his hand finding mine. His grip was warm, trembling, real. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was wrong." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I smiled. "You're not wrong, my love," I said. "You're just growing. Sometimes growing means forgetting where you started until you look back." The bride touched his arm gently. "She should sit with us," she said softly. That one sentence, simple, kind, broke the last wall inside me. I didn't expect forgiveness or recognition, but that invitation felt like the universe whispering, "You are seen again." They led me to the front. The guests who had once stared in judgment now smiled awkwardly, some even clapping quietly. But I didn't care for the applause. My heart was already full. As they exchanged vows, I watched with a peace I hadn't felt in years. Every word felt like a closing chapter and a new beginning. For him, for her, and perhaps for me too. When the ceremony ended, he turned to me. "Stay for dinner?" he asked, almost shyly. I chuckled softly. "Only if you promise not to tell me I'm too old to dance." He laughed, the same laugh I'd missed for so long. And just like that, the air lightened. Later that evening, as the music played and people danced, I sat quietly under a string of fairy lights. The bride joined me, her eyes kind and bright. "Your letter," she said, "was beautiful. I think every mother and son should read it." I smiled faintly. Maybe they should. Maybe then they'd understand that love doesn't end when the children grow up. It just changes its shape. We sat there together. Two women from different generations, bound by love for the same man. And as I looked across the room, at my son laughing, smiling, living, I realized something. I hadn't just come to his wedding. I had come to forgive, to heal, and to remind both of us that family isn't built on invitations. It's built on love that shows up even when it's told not to. But just as I thought the night had ended peacefully, something unexpected happened. A voice from behind me, quiet, unsure, said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry for what I said earlier." I turned. It was the bride's mother, her eyes soft now, her tone different. She said, "I didn't understand, but watching you, I do now. You didn't just raise a son, you raised a good man." Her words felt like a gentle closing note, one I didn't know I needed. I smiled. "Thank you," I said. It was worth every tear. And as the music swelled again, I looked up at the night sky, whispered a silent prayer, and smiled through my tears. Because that night, under the soft glow of wedding lights, I wasn't just a forgotten mother. I was a woman who showed up and reminded the world that love, no matter how old, never retires. As I walked home that night, something strange happened. A message popped up on my phone from a number I hadn't seen in years. It simply said, "Mom, can we talk? I think it's time I come home." And suddenly I knew. The story wasn't over yet. The morning after the wedding felt softer than I had expected. Sunlight slipped through the curtains like a gentle visitor, brushing across my hands as I sat by the window.
the same hands that had once held my son when he was no bigger than a loaf of bread. They looked older now, thinner, but there was strength in them still. I poured myself a cup of tea and smiled faintly. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to rush anywhere, fix anything, or wait for someone to call. The house felt still, but not empty. There was a kind of peace in the silence, the kind that comes only after storms. The echoes of the wedding were still in my mind. The vows, the smiles, the moment he said, "Mom." I replayed it again and again, like a lullaby I had forgotten I knew. And then I remembered that message from the night before, the one that flashed on my phone as I was walking home under the stars. "Mom, can we talk? I think it's time I come home." Just reading it again made my heart ache in the sweetest way, not because I needed him to come home, but because he wanted to. There's a difference, a small one, but powerful. When love is demanded, it fades. When love is chosen, it blooms again. I spent that morning thinking about what home really meant. For so long, I thought home was a place, these walls, these photographs, this small wooden chair I always sat in. But now, I understand. Homes aren't built with bricks. It's built with recognition. And last night, my son finally saw me again. It's strange, isn't it, how love between a parent and child can stretch across years, through silence and misunderstanding, and still survive. I thought about all those years I'd spent watching from the sidelines, birthdays I wasn't invited to, holidays that came and went without a single call. I used to cry quietly on those nights, pretending the sound of the kettle would hide my tears. But I realize now, those tears weren't weakness. They were proof that love still existed, even when it had nowhere to go. Because real love doesn't die when it's unreturned. It simply waits. That afternoon, my son came by. No suit this time, no wedding cause, just him. Simple shirt, tired eyes, and a kind of quiet that spoke louder than words. He stood at the doorway, hesitant. "Can I come in?" he asked. I smiled softly. You never needed to ask. He stepped inside like a boy returning from a long journey. For a while, we didn't say anything. We just sat, the ticking clock between us filling the silence. Finally, he sighed. "Mom, I don't know where to start." I placed my hand over his. "Then don't. Just sit with me. Sometimes words get in the way of what hearts already know." He looked at me, his eyes glassy. He said, "I thought I was protecting you," he said quietly, "from judgment, from people who might not understand. But maybe I was just protecting myself from guilt." I nodded slowly. "We all protect ourselves from something," I said. "But love isn't about protecting. It's about showing up, even when it hurts." He exhaled, leaning back, his shoulders finally dropping. He whispered, "You were right to come. I didn't know how much I needed to see you there until I did." And in that moment, forgiveness didn't need to be spoken. It was already alive, breathing in the space between us. Over the next few weeks, our conversations became regular. Small calls, shared dinners, quiet moments that felt like sunlight after winter. He'd sent pictures of his new home, sometimes of his wife cooking, sometimes of little things that reminded me of him, like a teacup, a song, or even a plant I used to keep by the window.
He was remembering. And I was learning how to live again. I joined a small community center nearby, a group of older women who met every Thursday to share stories and laughter. Some had lost husbands, some had lost children to distance, pride, or silence. But all of them carried a kind of wisdom in their eyes, the wisdom of women who had loved deeply and survived it. I found comfort there. One evening, as I shared my story, how I'd gone to my son's wedding uninvited, a woman across the table clasped my hand. "You're brave," she said, Most of us would have stayed home and cried, but you went, and that changed everything." Her words lingered. Maybe I was brave, but to me it wasn't bravery. It was love. Plain, stubborn, foolish love. The kind that refuses to stay silent. As time went on, I noticed something subtle. My son had started calling more often. Not out of obligation, but out of care. He'd ask for recipes, small advice, even just to hear my voice. And every time he said, "Mom," my heart whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. But beyond the healing between us, something deeper began to unfold within me. I realized that my worth was never meant to be measured by invitations or appearances. I didn't need a seat at anyone's table to matter. Because dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you choose to keep, no matter how the world sees you. And sometimes it takes being excluded to remember that truth. One day, his wife came to visit me alone. She carried a small box wrapped in gold paper. "This is from both of us," she said. Inside was a framed photo, the three of us at the wedding. I hadn't even realized anyone had taken it. I was smiling faintly, standing just behind them. But what struck me most was how peaceful I looked. "She said you changed the way he sees family," the young woman said softly. "He wants you to know that he's learning from you every day." Tears filled my eyes as I touched the frame. "He's learning," I whispered. "That's all a mother ever hopes for." She nodded, smiling. "You didn't just raise a son. You taught him what love looks like, even when it's broken." Sometimes, late at night, I sit by the window and think about all the women who feel forgotten, mothers, grandmothers, wives, who gave and gave until there was nothing left, and still the world called them too much or not enough. I wish I could tell each of them this: you are not invisible. Your love built the very people who forgot you. And even if they turn away, your love remains in the bones of everything they are. That's the secret I've learned. Love doesn't disappear when it's rejected. It transforms. It becomes wisdom. It becomes strength. It becomes a quiet kind of power. A few months later, my son and his wife came by again, this time with news. "We're expecting," he said, smiling nervously. My heart nearly burst. I laughed. I cried. I clutched his hands. "A baby," I whispered. "Another story beginning." And in that instant, I knew. Life has a way of circling back. What's lost isn't always gone. Sometimes it just needs time to find its way home. As they left that day, he turned back at the door. "Mom," he said softly, "you'll help us raise them, won't you?"
I smiled, tears in my eyes. "Of course," I whispered. "After all, that's what I do best." And so my story didn't end at that wedding. It began there, in forgiveness, in rediscovery, in the gentle realization that love, when tested, becomes truth. Because in the end, the real lesson isn't about being invited or accepted. It's about showing up for love, for life, and for yourself. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply to be present when the world tells them not to. Love that survives rejection becomes something sacred. It teaches resilience, patience, and grace. It whispers, "You are enough, even when you're forgotten." And one day, when those who turned away finally look back, they'll find you still standing, not bitter, not broken,
but beautifully alive, because the quiet strength of a mother's heart is eternal. The night before everything changed, I remember sitting in the same chair, staring at the moon through my kitchen window, wondering if my son even thought of me. Now, months later, I sit here again, but this time the air feels lighter. My heart isn't asking why anymore. It's whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for the lessons that broke me and rebuilt me. Thank you for the silence that taught me to listen to my own soul. Thank you for the pain that turned into peace." Sometimes the stories that hurt us most are the ones that set us free. When my son told me not to come to his wedding, I thought I'd reached the end of my story, that I'd been erased from the very life I'd helped build. But I see now that I was never erased. I was simply written into a quieter chapter, one I had to read alone to understand its meaning. It wasn't a story about rejection. It was about rediscovery, not about loss, but about love, the kind that doesn't need permission to exist. Because love, real love, doesn't vanish when it's pushed away. It transforms into something wiser, gentler, almost divine. I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing not to let pain define who you become. And maybe that's the lesson every mother, every woman, every heartbroken soul eventually learns. That peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from understanding yourself. You see, we spend so much of our lives trying to be good. Good mothers, good wives, good daughters, good people. We give and give, thinking love means sacrifice. But sometimes love means saying, "I deserve to be seen too."
The day I walked into that wedding, I wasn't looking for attention or revenge. I was looking for the truth. And when my son looked at me, really looked at me, I realized I'd found it. He didn't see the woman who cooked and cleaned and sacrificed her dreams. He saw the woman who raised him, the woman who stood by him even when he forgot she was standing there. And in that moment, I saw him too, not as the boy who broke my heart, but as the man still learning how to love. That's the beauty of life. We're all still learning. If my story reaches even one person out there, one mother who feels forgotten, one grandmother who feels too old to matter, one woman who feels invisible, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are not too late for new beginnings. The world may try to tell you your best years are behind you, but they're wrong. Your best years are the ones where you finally live for yourself, where your peace is louder than their opinions, where your love is rooted not in need, but in truth. And when you stop chasing the version of yourself that everyone else wants you to be, that's when the real story begins. Sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I can still hear my son's voice at the wedding, the way he said, "That's my mother." And every time I remember, I smile. Not because it erased the hurt, but because it reminded me that love, no matter how bruised, still finds its way home. So, to anyone listening, anyone who's ever been told they're not wanted, not needed, not enough, let this story be your reminder. You are still the heartbeat of your story. And your story isn't over yet. If you've stayed with me through this journey, through the heartbreak, the silence, the rediscovery, thank you. It means more than words can say. And if this story touched you, even just a little, I have one small request. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Silent Truths, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories, your voices, your presence, they matter. Because somewhere out there, another soul needs to hear what you've learned. Don't miss the next story. It's coming soon, and it carries a truth even deeper than this one. Until then, remember this, my dear ones. You're never too old to start again. You're never too forgotten to be found. And you're never too broken to bloom. Because sometimes, when life tells you not to show up, that's exactly when you must.